My parents raised me to be perfect and ignored my little brother. I thought their love was real until a panic attack showed me the truth. Years later, they begged me to come home, but I wasn't the same daughter they'd trained me to be. My family believed that failure was a choice. Every grade below an A, every second-place finish, every moment of imperfection was met with consequences that I learned to accept as normal. For 18 years, I thought every family operated like ours. I was wrong. My mother kept a chart on the refrigerator tracking my grades, my weight, my practice hours, and my achievements. Red marks meant punishment. Gold stars meant temporary approval. There was never an in-between. My younger brother David got different treatment. He was allowed to be average, to play video games, to have friends over. But I was the firstborn daughter, and according to my parents, I had a responsibility to represent our family's values. Excellence was not optional. Every morning started the same way. Mom would inspect my appearance, checking that my uniform was perfectly pressed, my hair neatly braided, my posture straight. Any imperfection meant starting over, making me late for school, which would later result in additional consequences at home. The violin lessons began when I was 5. 2 hours of practice every day after school, no exceptions. When I asked to try soccer instead, my father looked at me like I had suggested burning down the house. Sports were for people who lacked the discipline for real achievement, he said. Music would teach me precision and control. My fingers bled during those early years. The strings cut into my skin until calluses formed. When I showed my mother the cuts, she handed me bandages and told me that greatness required sacrifice. The bleeding was proof I was working hard enough. School became my refuge, but also my prison. I excelled academically because failure at home was not an option. Teachers praised my work, and my parents took credit for their strict methods. See? They would tell neighbors and relatives, this is what happens when you have standards. But the standards kept rising. An A- was no longer acceptable. Being first chair in the school orchestra was not enough. I needed to win regional competitions. Making honor roll was expected. I needed to be valedictorian. David watched all of this from the sidelines. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with something that might have been pity, but he never said anything. He had learned early to stay invisible when our parents' attention was focused on my imperfections. The summer before my senior year, everything changed. I had been accepted to a prestigious music camp, a 5-week program that would look excellent on college applications. The camp required students to room with partners and participate in group activities. For the first time in my life, I was around other high-achieving teenagers whose parents were not constantly watching. My roommate was a girl named Sarah from Oregon. She played piano and had been homeschooled her entire life. On our first night, she noticed me practicing violin at 11 p.m. "Do you ever take breaks?" she asked, not unkindly. "My parents expect 2 hours of practice every day, no matter what," I explained. "I'm already behind today." Sarah sat up in her bed. "It's your first day at camp. You traveled for 6 hours to get here. Don't you think you've done enough for today?" The question confused me. I had never considered whether I had done enough. The concept of enough did not exist in my vocabulary. There was only more to do, higher standards to meet, new levels of perfection to achieve. Over the next few weeks, I watched how the other students interacted with their families during the weekly phone calls. They talked about fun activities, shared jokes, asked about pets and friends. When my parents called, the conversation consisted of a detailed report of my practice hours, my performance evaluations, and my plans for improvement. "How are you feeling?" my mother asked during one call. I started to say tired, overwhelmed, homesick. But I caught myself. "I'm working hard and staying focused on my goals." "Good. Remember, everyone else there is competition. Don't let them distract you from why you're there." After I hung up, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Do your parents ever ask if you're happy?" I thought about it. That's not really the point. What is the point? Being the best, making them proud, proving that their methods work. Sarah looked at me with an expression I could not identify. Years later, I would recognize it as concern. The camp ended, and I returned home to begin senior year. The college application process consumed every moment of my free time. My parents had already decided where I would apply: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and MIT. all schools with prestigious music programs and academic reputations that would reflect well on our family. I wanted to apply to smaller liberal arts colleges with strong music programs and more personal attention. When I mentioned this, my father's reaction was swift and severe. I spent that evening standing in the corner of the living room, holding my violin above my head until my arms shook with exhaustion. It was a punishment from my childhood that I thought I had outgrown. Average schools are for average people, he said as I finally lowered my arms. Is that what you want to be? The applications required essays about my passions and goals. I sat at my desk for hours, trying to write about my love for music, but the words felt empty. Did I love music, or had I just been conditioned to excel at it? What were my goals beyond meeting my parents' expectations? These questions terrified me because I did not have answers. In November, I had my first panic attack. It happened during a violin lesson with my private instructor, a woman who had been working with me for 3 years. I was attempting a particularly difficult passage when suddenly I could not breathe. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred, and I thought I was dying. My instructor, Mrs. Chen, immediately recognized what was happening. She helped me sit down, taught me breathing exercises, and waited patiently until the attack passed. When I could speak again, she asked gently if this had happened before. Not like this, I admitted, but sometimes I feel like I can't breathe when I think about making mistakes. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. How long have you been playing violin? 13 years. Do you enjoy it? The question stopped me cold. No adult had ever asked me that. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I used to. That conversation planted a seed of doubt that grew over the following months. I began to notice things about my life that had always been there but that I had never questioned. The way my stomach clenched when I walked through the front door each day. The constant mental calculation of whether my performance would meet expectations. The absence of any activity that I did purely for enjoyment. College acceptances and rejections arrived in the spring. I was accepted to 3 of the 5 schools my parents had chosen, waitlisted at 1, and rejected from Harvard. The rejection letter felt like a personal failure, even though getting into any of these schools was an achievement. My parents' reaction to the Harvard rejection was devastating. They analyzed every aspect of my application, searching for the flaw that had cost me admission. Was it my essay? My interview? Had I not practiced enough? The questions went on for days. David, now a sophomore in high school, watched these discussions with growing discomfort. One evening, he knocked on my bedroom door and asked if we could talk. Are you okay? He asked, sitting on the edge of my bed. I'm fine, I said automatically. No, I mean really okay. You look sick all the time now. And the panic attacks. I was surprised he had noticed. How do you know about those? I hear you at night sometimes, trying to breathe quietly so they won't wake up. He was quiet for a moment. It's not normal what they do to you. They have high standards. They want me to succeed. They want you to be perfect, and that's impossible. David looked older than his 16 years. I see how you flinch when they raise their voices, how you check their moods before you say anything. That's not love, that's fear. His words hit me like a physical blow because I recognized the truth in them. I did live in fear, fear of disappointing them, fear of falling short, fear of being anything less than their definition of perfect. I chose Stanford for college, partly because it was the most prestigious option available, and partly because it was 3,000 miles away from home. The distance felt necessary, though I could not have articulated why at the time. My first semester of college was a revelation. Without my parents' constant monitoring, I had to learn who I was and what I actually wanted. The freedom was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I continued playing violin because it was expected, but I also signed up for classes that interested me: psychology, creative writing, philosophy. My parents disapproved of these distractions during our weekly phone calls, but they could not control my schedule from across the country. In my psychology class, we studied family dynamics and childhood development. As I learned about healthy versus dysfunctional family patterns, I began to understand that my upbringing had not been normal. The constant criticism, the impossible standards, the punishments for imperfection. These were markers of emotional abuse, not effective parenting. The professor assigned a project about personal resilience. Students were asked to identify a challenging experience from their past and analyze how it had shaped them. I chose to write about my relationship with perfectionism. As I researched the topic, I discovered terms that perfectly describe my experience: emotional abuse, conditional love, perfectionism as trauma response. Reading these clinical descriptions of my childhood was like looking at my life through a new lens. I called David after finishing the project. "Do you think our parents were abusive?" I asked without preamble. There was a long pause. "I think they damaged you," he said finally. "I think they made you believe your worth depends on being perfect, and that's really messed up. But they never hit me. They never called me names." "There are other ways to hurt someone," David said quietly. "I've been reading about it too. What they did to you has a name: emotional abuse." That conversation was the beginning of my awakening. I started seeing a counselor at the campus health center, a kind woman named Dr. Rodriguez, who specialized in family trauma. With her help, I began to unpack 18 years of conditioning. "You learned to associate love with performance," she explained during one session. "Your parents taught you that their approval was contingent on your achievements. That's not how healthy families work. But they wanted me to succeed. They pushed me because they cared. Caring parents support their children's growth. They don't punish them for being human." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. "What would have happened if you had brought home a B in high school?" I thought about it. I would have been grounded, lost privileges, had to do extra practice hours. And what would have happened if you had told them you wanted to quit violin and try theater instead? They would have said theater was a waste of time, that I was throwing away years of investment. Do you see the pattern? Your worth in their eyes was tied to specific achievements and behaviors. That's conditional love, and it's harmful to a child's development. These sessions were painful but necessary. I grieved for the childhood I had never had, for the unconditional love I had never received. I also began to feel angry, which scared me. Good daughters were not supposed to be angry at their parents. My grades suffered as I worked through these emotional discoveries. For the first time in my life, I received a C on an assignment. Instead of panic, I felt something unexpected: relief. The world did not end. I was still worthy of love and respect despite my imperfection. When my parents called that week, I decided to tell them about the counseling. Their reaction was exactly what I expected and feared. "Therapy is for people with real problems," my mother said. "You have everything you could want: a good education, opportunities we never had. What could you possibly need to discuss with a stranger?" "I'm working through some things about perfectionism and anxiety." "Those are not problems. Those are character traits that have made you successful." My father took the phone. "If you're struggling academically, the solution is to work harder, not to make excuses with some therapist. We're disappointed that we raised a daughter who blames her parents for her own shortcomings." I hung up feeling shaky but also strangely liberated. For the first time, I had stated my truth and stood by it, even when they rejected it. Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that their reaction was typical of emotionally abusive parents. "They see your healing as a threat to their control," she explained. "Your growth forces them to confront their behavior, and they're not ready for that." As sophomore year progressed, I made decisions that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. I auditioned for a part in the school musical, something I had always wanted to try. I joined an intramural soccer team. I allowed myself to earn B's in classes where perfection was not realistic or necessary. Most importantly, I changed my major from music to psychology. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but it also felt authentic in a way that nothing in my life had before. My parents' reaction to the major change was volcanic. They threatened to stop paying for college unless I changed back. They accused me of being ungrateful and throwing away my talents. They suggested that therapy had corrupted my thinking and that I was no longer the daughter they had raised. That last part was true. I was no longer the daughter they had trained me to be, and I was grateful for that. With Dr. Rodriguez's support, I applied for financial aid and work-study programs. If my parents withdrew their support, I would find other ways to pay for school. The prospect was frightening, but not as frightening as returning to a life where my worth depended on their approval. David called me after my parents had shared their ultimatum with him. "They want me to convince you to change your major back," he said. "They think I have influence over you." "What did you tell them?" "That you're finally becoming yourself, and they should be proud of that." He paused. "I'm proud of you. It takes guts to disappoint them. That conversation meant more to me than any grade or award I had ever received. My parents did follow through on their threat. They stopped paying my tuition and cut off contact with me entirely. The financial strain was significant, but I found ways to manage through loans, work-study, and a part-time job, tutoring other students in music theory. The emotional impact was harder to navigate. Despite everything, I still loved my parents and wanted their approval. Losing their support felt like abandonment, even though I had been the one to choose authenticity over compliance. Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that grief was a normal part of healing from family trauma. You're mourning the relationship you wish you could have had with them, she explained. That's different from mourning who they actually were. College continued to be a place of growth and discovery. I made friends who valued me for my humor, kindness, and interests rather than my achievements. I dated people who found my imperfections endearing rather than disappointing. I learned to enjoy activities simply because they brought me joy. The violin remained part of my life, but in a different way. I joined a casual chamber group that played for fun rather than competition. I discovered that I actually loved music when it was not tied to expectations and evaluations. During my junior year, David began having his own struggles with our parents. They had transferred their perfectionist expectations to him as I had become a disappointment. He called me regularly, asking for advice on how to handle their pressure. It's different for you, I told him during one conversation. You have the advantage of seeing what happened to me. You can make different choices. But what if I'm not strong enough to disappoint them like you did? You are strong enough, and you're not disappointing them by being yourself. You're just refusing to be their projection of who they think you should be. David's situation forced me to confront how much my parents' behavior had affected both of us. I began to consider whether staying silent about their abuse was enabling them to continue harming my brother. With Dr. Rodriguez's guidance, I wrote a letter to my parents, not to reconcile or to seek their approval, but to clearly state the impact their parenting had on me and to request that they get professional help before continuing to damage David. The letter was direct but not cruel. I explained how their conditional love had affected my mental health, how their impossible standards had prevented me from developing a healthy sense of self-worth, and how their emotional abuse had shaped my ability to form relationships. I told them I loved them but could not have a relationship with them unless they acknowledged the harm they had caused and committed to changing their behavior. I never received a response to the letter, but David told me that it had an impact. My parents were upset and confused by my accusations, but they also began to question some of their methods. They started attending family counseling, though David reported that they spent most sessions defending their parenting style rather than examining it. Still, it was a beginning. I graduated from college with honors, though not the highest honors I once would have demanded of myself. My parents did not attend the ceremony. Instead, David drove up with his girlfriend, a sweet girl named Maria who came from a warm, supportive family. Watching them together showed me what healthy relationships looked like. Mrs. Chen, my former violin instructor, also came to graduation. She had stayed in touch throughout college, offering encouragement and support. I'm proud of the woman you've become, she told me after the ceremony. You found your own voice? Graduate school was at a different university, one I chose for its excellent psychology program and supportive faculty. I was interested in specializing in family therapy, particularly working with young adults recovering from childhood emotional abuse. My first semester included a practicum where students counseled other students under supervision. One of my clients was a freshman who reminded me of myself at 18. Brilliant, driven, and carrying the weight of impossible parental expectations. I don't understand why I feel so anxious all the time, she said during our first session. I'm doing well in all my classes. I practice piano 4 hours a day. I'm doing everything right. What would happen if you weren't doing everything right? I asked gently. I can't think about that. It's not an option. Helping her explore these feelings brought back memories of my own journey. I realized how far I had come, but also how much healing work remained to be done. During my second year of graduate school, David made his own break from our parents' expectations. He decided not to attend the college they had chosen for him, opting instead for a state school where he could study environmental science and play on the baseball team. Their reaction was predictably harsh. They accused him of following my bad example and threatened to cut him off financially as they had done with me. But David had saved money from part-time jobs and had applied for scholarships without telling them. I learned from watching you, he told me during a phone call. I saw that it was possible to survive their disapproval. How are you feeling about it? Scared, but also free, he said. For the first time in my life, I'm making choices based on what I want, not what they want. David's decision to assert his independence seemed to be a turning point for our parents. Without either of their children willing to conform to their expectations, they were forced to confront the possibility that their methods were flawed. They reached out to me for the first time in 3 years, asking if I would be willing to participate in family therapy with them. The request came through David, who had maintained minimal contact with them throughout college. I discussed the idea extensively with my own therapist, who had replaced Dr. Rodriguez when I moved for graduate school. We talked about the potential benefits and risks of engaging with my parents before I felt fully healed from their abuse. What would you want to get out of family therapy? My therapist asked. I want them to understand how their behavior affected me. I want an acknowledgement that they hurt me and a commitment to change. And if they can't give you those things, then I'll know I tried and I can move forward without wondering if reconciliation was possible. I agreed to attend family therapy with conditions. The sessions would be led by a therapist experienced in family trauma, not someone my parents had chosen. I would participate for a limited time period, and I could leave if the sessions became harmful to my well-being. The first session was incredibly difficult. My parents had prepared by reading books about parenting and family dynamics, but their initial approach was defensive. They acknowledged that they had been strict, but maintained that their methods had been necessary to help me succeed. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, was skilled at guiding the conversation away from justifications toward examining impact. Regardless of your intentions, he said to my parents, "What effect did your parenting style have on your daughter?" That question opened a floodgate. I spoke about the anxiety, the panic attacks, the inability to enjoy achievements, the fear of making mistakes, the conditional love that had shaped my understanding of relationships. I talked about the years of therapy it had taken to develop a healthy sense of self-worth. My parents listened, and I could see their discomfort growing as I described the impact of their behavior. My mother cried when I talked about the panic attacks. My father looked stricken when I explained how their conditional love had affected my ability to trust people. "We thought we were helping you reach your potential," my mother said after I finished. "We never wanted to hurt you." "But you did hurt me," I replied, "and the fact that you didn't intend to doesn't erase the damage." The therapy sessions continued for several months. Progress was slow and sometimes frustrating. My parents struggled to move beyond defending their intentions to examining their impact. They had difficulty accepting that love and harm could coexist in their parenting. But gradually, something shifted. They began to understand that their definition of success had been narrow and destructive. They started to see how their conditional approval had damaged both of their children. The breakthrough came when my father talked about his own childhood. His parents had been immigrants who sacrificed everything for their children's education. He had internalized the message that anything less than perfection was disrespectful to their sacrifices. "I thought I was passing on their values," he said during one session, "but I see now that I passed on their trauma instead." That recognition opened the door to real change. My parents began to do their own individual therapy work, examining the family patterns they had inherited and perpetuated. They started to understand that healing required more than just changing their behavior. It required changing their fundamental beliefs about love, worth, and success. The reconciliation process was slow and complicated. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. My parents sometimes reverted to old patterns, and I had to learn to set boundaries while remaining open to growth. But over time, our relationship evolved into something healthier. They learned to express pride in who I was becoming, rather than disappointment in who I had not been. They began to ask about my happiness and well-being, not just my achievements. I finished graduate school and began working as a family therapist, specializing in helping young adults recover from perfectionist parenting and emotional abuse. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful. I felt like I was helping to break cycles of trauma that could span generations. David graduated from college and began working for an environmental nonprofit. He was happy and fulfilled in ways that had nothing to do with traditional markers of success. Our parents learned to celebrate his passion for his work, rather than mourn his decision not to pursue a more prestigious career. On my 30th birthday, my parents came to visit my apartment for the first time. They brought gifts that reflected who I actually was: books about psychology, art supplies, a plant for my garden. They admired the photos on my walls, asked about my friends, and expressed genuine interest in my life. During dinner, my mother said something that would have been unimaginable years earlier. "I'm proud of the woman you've become, not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you are." Those words meant everything to me because they represented a fundamental shift in how my parents understood love and worth. They had learned to value me as a person rather than as a reflection of their parenting success. The relationship we built was different from what either of us had originally envisioned. It was based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, on acceptance rather than expectations. It was healthier and more authentic than anything we had shared before. I never returned to competitive violin playing, but music remained part of my life in ways that brought me joy. I played in community orchestras and taught lessons to children whose parents supported their musical exploration without demanding perfection. David met a wonderful woman during his senior year of college, someone who came from a family that valued kindness and authenticity over achievement. Watching their relationship showed me that it was possible to love someone unconditionally, to support their growth without trying to control their choices. My work as a therapist connected me with many young adults whose stories echoed my own. I helped them recognize that their worth was not conditional on their performance, that they deserved love simply for being themselves. Each success in therapy felt like a small victory against the cycles of trauma that had shaped my own childhood. The healing process taught me that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and that reconciliation is not always possible or advisable. Some family relationships cannot be salvaged, and that's okay. But in cases where parents are willing to do the hard work of examining their behavior and making real changes, healing is possible. My parents and I will never have the uncomplicated relationship that some families enjoy. Too much damage was done in my formative years for that to be realistic. But we have built something new together. A relationship based on honesty, mutual respect, and the hard-won wisdom that love should never be conditional. The little girl who stood in corners holding violins above her head until her arms shook with exhaustion could never have imagined this outcome. She was focused on survival, on meeting impossible standards, on earning love through performance. The woman I became learned that she was worthy of love simply for existing. That lesson took years to internalize, but it changed everything about how I move through the world. I no longer believe that failure is a choice or that perfection is possible. I understand that growth requires making mistakes, that authenticity is more valuable than achievement, and that the only approval that truly matters is the approval I give myself. These are the lessons I hope to pass on to future generations, whether through my work as a therapist, my relationships with friends and family, or perhaps someday as a parent myself. The cycle of conditional love and impossible expectations that shaped my childhood will end with me. That may be the most important achievement of my life, though my younger self would never have understood why.